life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brooke Ashley.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
And tonight, to continue our Spooktacular Halloween something yada yada. I like that's the official title it has been since we started this.
Spooktacular
Halloween. We are going to talk about hauntings, ghost sightings, things like that, supernatural. And I think, Brooke, you have a personal experience. I think ours is kind of more secondhand and hearsay stories, but you have a personal experience. So
I do. And let me just say, I think it's hilarious that the person who hates all the horror movies, scary stuff, is the one that has the...
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Might be some causation going on there too, though.
Yeah. So, everybody always talks about churches being haunted, and almost every church that we have served has had some kind of story about hauntings or ghost sightings or something. I haven't heard anything at the newest church that we're at right now, but when we were in Elk Garden in Lebanon, Virginia, everybody kept talking about this ghost, and that they would talk about, when they would have lock-ins and those kind of things at the church, that they would all stay together because they just knew they were going to see the ghost. And so people would talk about things being moved, you'd set things up and you'd come back and things would be moved or what have you. And so totally not a believer in this kind of stuff. I mean, I just thought it was all hogwash. People were making it up in their heads, like they thought they'd mix, or somebody was coming in and moving around. And I mean, I've been a youth director before, so I know how youth lock-ins go and how people do things to make the youth, you tell stories and then you do stuff, and but I had my own personal encounter with the ghost at Elk Garden, and I didn't know a whole lot about what the ghost was supposed to look like or anything. But so one day we had an event at the church, and I had run to Walmart, gotten some things for the event and for the house, and I had put it in the fridge. And after the event, we ran into town to eat. And on the way back, we were just going to stop and get the stuff out of the fridge and take it home. So Aaron pulls in the parking lot, and I was just going to run in the back door, run into the kitchen, grab the stuff and leave. So I didn't bother turning all the lights on. And so I was just using the little light on my phone, and I go in to the refrigerator and I open the refrigerator, and I had that eerie sense that I was being watched. Right. So I closed the refrigerator and I listened. And again, I didn't think much about it because the Elk Garden Church is used as a hostel for the Centennial Bicycle route. And so people sleep there all the time. So it's not unusual to walk in and, still be dark, but somebody be sleeping. So I just thought there was a cyclist that I had disrupted or whatever. So I close the door and turn around because I'm going to introduce myself so that I don't freak out the cyclist. Right. And I turn around and there's a figure there, not a person, not, a figure. And it was a lady in a gown. And I grabbed whatever it was out of the refrigerator and just left. My heart was beating like crazy.
Didn't introduce yourself?
No, I was very inhospitable, and so I get to the car and Aaron is like, what in the world? Because I'm out of breath, and I'm like, you'll not believe. And so I've wrestled with this forever. Did I make it up in my head? I don't think so, because after I was talking with some of our older folks at the church and described what I saw, the rest of the story was that it was the wife of the pastor. Many, many years ago, she had died in the parsonage, and the parsonage is right across the yard from the church. And the story was that the lady walked back and forth between the church and the kitchen at the house and in the kitchen of the church. And so yeah, so spooky, freaky things.
That's really interesting. I had heard that the Elk Garden School was haunted as well.
Yeah,
I,
I've heard that too.
yeah.
I haven't had any personal experiences. Now, that is an old building.
Mm-hmm.
Not as old as the church building, but I mean, it's what, 107 years old now, 108 years old. So I had heard that. I have had folks tell me they've had encounters at the
Mm-hmm.
school, but I didn't myself. So, and I was there a lot. So, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially coming from saying that you weren't necessarily a believer in that type of thing, and then to see it firsthand. I would imagine that you are very close to being a believer now. Like even though you're wrestling with it still,
Yeah,
just a
so
firsthand
like
experience
I
would
really
change things.
struggle. I mean, I struggle with this, right? I mean, I struggle with if ghosts are real. I mean, if all this stuff is real, why do we not have more encounters?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they so rare? You
Right.
know, I try to think back to that day. Had we been talking about that? I don't think so because it was
Yeah.
Easter. Easter's not normally the time that you talk about ghosts. You know, if it had been in October or something like that, I'd have been like, yeah, this is just my mind
Right.
playing tricks on me. You know, so, and then I think back to, you know, as a preacher's wife, a lot of times we're the last ones to leave.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're back and forth into the kitchen and out of the kitchen, back and forth between the parsonage and the church. And I was like, maybe, you know, she was coming to check and make sure everything was cleaned up, ready for service the next morning. Or, you know, I don't know. It kind of makes me feel a little weird just thinking about it, a little spooked. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
the story that Mom has told me, and again, I don't even think she has firsthand experience. My uncle basically moved into my grandpa's house when he passed away, and that was back into 2011. And almost immediately, it seemed like after he passed away in the house. Stuff started happening. My uncle said that you would hear like cabinets opening and shutting, the refrigerator door opening and shutting. You could smell. There was distinct smells. He smoked cigarettes. He drank a lot of coffee. You could smell those things. You could. I even think that there was dishes and stuff rattling and moving, and it scared him, and I think his kids too. Like they would be there and they would say there's something weird's going on with this house, and it was immediately after he had passed. So and obviously I give a lot of merit to that.
Sure.
It being my uncle, and Mom believes it truly as well. So it makes me a believer. Like I guess I should say I want to be a believer. Like I've always wanted to be a believer. This stuff has always been interesting to me. Before I was a Christian, after I was a Christian, it never stopped. It's just fascinating to me, spirits and the afterlife. It's just I've never had that experience, and I've often wondered, or I've often been interested in going out, and like Ghost Hunters was probably one of my favorite shows as a teenager. And that was one of the things I had planned on doing when I got, an adult and a little more brave. It's like, I'm going to do this, right? But then the funny thing happened. I became a Christian, and then I started learning more about demons. And that gave me pause. So I guess I don't want to continue rambling. Bowling, did you have something to say?
No, I also don't have any like personal experience with stuff like that. This is something that my sister's also found really interesting her whole life too. So I guess I'll kind of secondhand talk about her. But she used to have a friend in high school that their family owned what was known as a haunted orphanage type thing around there. People would always try to break in there on their own, but since it was their family property, they actually were allowed to go. And so she went with him a few times, and they like had a group, and I'm pretty sure they camped out there at least a couple of times, and never had any like anything definitive, but always kind of like what was that sound, what was that, did we hear something, did you see something on the corner of your eye type thing. she's always been the top two that's wanted to go, some of those like, pay $200 and spend the night in this haunted castle or something like that. I think there's a couple around, and that's always been like one of her life goals. But yeah, I don't think she's ever had anything definitive either, but kind of like you, Justin, that's one of her life's passions, is just she finds it very interesting.
Y'all are crazy.
Maybe.
But I kind of wanted to ask that question to you, Justin, because you were talking about like, you mentioned maybe tempering your expectation, maybe not expectations, but your excitement for it after becoming a Christian. Is there a reason for that? Do you think that there's like some kind of conflict?
Not even after I become a Christian. It's after I become a more mature Christian, and I started, I guess, understanding more or believing in more of the demonic, and hearing of stories of demons really attaching themselves to people. And even though I don't have personal experiences in exorcisms or anything like that, just knowing that those type of things can exist, that gives me pause to, and I think there's plenty of biblical references in the Old Testament of why you shouldn't be diving mediums or psychics or wizardry or whatever it says in the Old Testament. And I think that's the reason why, because there is a huge danger in the spiritual realm of allowing something to attach themselves to you that you're not wanting. You don't think it's, and so the research I was doing for this topic indicated to me that at least in the evangelical realm of Christianity, believing in ghosts, and I'm saying ghosts as in human spirits, is pretty taboo, because the popular Christian belief is that once you pass away, you are immediately judged and you go to heaven or hell. So
that's kind of a new thing. I mean, that your spirit immediately goes to heaven.
That's
kind
true.
of a new thing.
It is a new thing, but most modern Christians believe that now, right? So that doesn't leave room for a middle ground, a purgatory, if you will, a place where spirits will go to rest, a resting place that we have some kind of access to that's still on earth.
So, there's a story in the Old Testament about King Saul summoning the spirit of Samuel.
Yep.
So that
there's also Jesus during the Transfiguration. You even see
you see Moses and Elijah,
yeah.
So that tells me that there's something to this, right? I mean, this isn't just made up hogwash.
So a question to that specifically, isn't the post Jesus resurrection belief that now that Jesus has resurrected, like basically he opened up Hades, and so now souls are not trapped in any kind of middle ground, that he opened the gates of heaven during that death resurrection. Isn't that the belief?
That's a common belief that I've heard some people say, because you hear about like Peter talking about in 2 Peter, I think, where he says he went and preached to the souls in prison or something like that.
Right.
But I think you have to kind of separate like what you're talking about here when you're defining ghosts. And I know I'm always a stickler for definitions, but like if you're talking about somebody in heaven, there's definitely like, being Catholic, there's a lot of beliefs in apparitions. And that's usually when you hear like somebody in heaven, a saint or somebody like that, you don't usually hear that called a ghost, but it's, somebody in heaven that appears to somebody on earth. So I wouldn't think that's kind of what we mean when we call a ghost. But if it was, I don't think there's any theological issues with that. I think where it gets a little iffy is kind of where you're talking about, like you have somebody that's just, wandering the halls because they can't pass on. It's kind of what you see in, popular culture or what, something like that. And I can't see how that would be anything either. If you're in a final destination, it doesn't make that story just doesn't make much sense to me. Either you have to be in purgatory or something like that, like you mentioned, right. Or like if you're in heaven, you've already reached your final judgment. You're not going to be in this kind of stuck state. And if you're in hell, the same thing. And even in hell, I think there's an additional theological what is it like? Maybe not problem, but at least issue to work through that you hear. I've heard brought up in terms of ghosts before. We hear the story of Lazarus wants to speak to somebody on earth and warn them about all the dangers, and he is seemingly unable to. Now, this is a parable, so it may not be like an exact, Jesus trying to give a play-by-play definition of how things like that work in hell, but I've definitely heard that brought up before as a theological issue you may have to work through. I just didn't know if you had any thoughts about those.
Well, I think we spend a lot of time speculating because we are so worried about it. No choking.
That did not go down right. About saw a ghost on screen.
I was like, I can't do the maneuver formerly called the Heimlich from here. Are you good?
All good now.
Okay. But I think we do lots of speculation. I mean, you hear this with, what is it going to be like when Jesus comes back? And if your faith is all about just the in life, right? I can see where that would be super uber important, but I don't know that even you could study the scriptures and writings of theologians and you're still not going to come up with a definitive answer. And so it's fun to have the conversations and brain exercises, if you will, but I'm not sure that we should spend as much time as we do and put all of our eggs in one basket, if you will, like that's the end goal.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's fair on a lot of questions that we come up with that the Bible is either silent on, or there's just not a lot of content here, and I think ghost spirits are actually one of that. You can actually look in the New Testament and Jesus himself talks about a spirit. He's telling the disciples, do you think that I'm a spirit? I have flesh. I can't be a spirit. So he is acknowledging that spirits, in my opinion, he's acknowledging spirits exist. Now, what kind of spirit is he talking about? The New Testament talks about unclean spirits all the time. It's everywhere, right? But is that, in our interpretation of it, we think unclean spirit equals demon. But is that exactly what, in all cases, like, could there be human spirits that if they were terrible people on earth and then in the afterlife, if there is some middle ground, are they still unclean spirits? Maybe. Like, the Bible is just pretty silent on that. So I think speculation is the route you end up going, and we shouldn't dive too. I guess we shouldn't care too deeply about this stuff.
We are warned throughout Scripture about divination and sorcery, and if there wasn't something real to that, people wouldn't have wasted the paper.
Yep.
I mean,
and I meant to playing devil's advocate there. I just wanted, I like to poke things, but I like your all's answer of that. Most of the people that try to claim, I think that it's, biblically impossible for something like this. They're pulling verses from places that aren't explicitly talking about it and deriving that. And that's a fair enough belief, but that's also not what the Bible was talking about. You're kind of implying something from somewhere else and reading into it, and maybe that's right, but also like that's not what it's talking about either, so don't try to read too much into it.
Back to your question, Bowling, of how do we define a ghost or a spirit? In my opinion, it's all of the above. Like the residual hauntings that Brooke mentioned in her story, and the apparitions that you mentioned, that of a saint that appears. It's maybe sort of a miracle type situation where they appear. I think both of those are ghosts, apparitions. It's sightings. It's unexplained sightings that we we can't come up with a good explanation for, but we're getting some kind of access to an afterlife.
Well, I think it's important too when we're looking at the scripture, and I wish I'd written all this down. Aaron and I were talking about it. I tried to get him to come on, but he's busy watching football. But anyway, he cautioned me about that when we see the word ghost or spirit in scripture, it's not always the same word. So it's different. There's different words in Hebrew and in Greek for what we translate as spirit or ghost. And so they kind of mean have some nuanced meanings
Mm-hmm.
with that. And I didn't have time to really look all that up as we talked about it. But if I had, I would have. But you know, I do think that because there's so many warnings, that there's something to it.
Yep.
You know, and I jokingly said they wouldn't have wasted the paper, but in all honesty, that was really a thing. I
Right.
mean, for us, wasting paper is not a big deal, but when you think about the effort that it took to write things down when scriptures were being written down,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of stuff that got left out because the writer didn't deem it important enough to use the paper. Honestly,
John literally says that. He's like, Jesus
yeah,
said a bunch of other stuff. I just wrote down the most important.
yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't write it all down, you know. So, but yeah, but I mean, and I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but you know, the whole Ouija board, the
Yeah.
whole having your fortune told, the whole trying to talk to the dead is just something that as a person of faith, a follower of Christ, I'm not real comfortable with because scripture tells me that that should be something. And I don't know that I've talked about this, but there have been a few places in my life that I've been to that have just felt heavy, like dark
Mm-hmm.
and heavy, and you can't put your finger on it. And it's just super uncomfortable. And New Orleans was a place like that for me. So when we went to New Orleans, we didn't do the tourist thing. We were on a mission. And so we saw some of the ugly of the ugly. And all I can describe it as being is a feeling of dirty and cold, you know. And I have to think that there was something to that. You know, it was particularly around places that were doing those kind of things, you know, and voodoo shops and that kind of stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, I really do believe that there is a danger in practicing those type of things. I do wonder, especially about mediums, because on face value, it seems like a lot of mediums are doing a good. They're trying to give some closure to families. So, what other than you can look in the Old Testament and see where the warnings are. What are the practical, I guess, dangers in them contacting the spirit realm and giving messages to people?
I think it just, you know, you've talked a lot about demonic spirits or
Mm-hmm.
evil spirits or unclean spirits. I think there are things that we can do that opened ourselves up to being affected by those.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like this is one of them. I mean, I'm not saying that if somebody goes to a medium and wants to hear what their loved one, you know, the last words they had, but I think dabbling in that, I think putting your trust and faith in that becomes an issue. I mean, I've got friends that won't do anything before they, you know, look at the tarot cards, or you know, they check their horoscope before they even go out for the day. And if it's a certain thing, then they don't do other things.
Yeah.
You know, that is very dangerous.
It is, and I just watched the movie Annabelle Creation. Have either of you seen that? Are you familiar with
Usually.
Annabelle?
I've heard of Annabelle, but yeah,
Okay.
you know,
It's in the
answer is no, you've not
Conjuring
seen it.
universe, and it's about a doll, shocker. And so this is actually based on a true story. And actually, I think most of the Conjuring stories are. It's about a husband and wife team, Christian, and they're both Christian. And I read that the Catholic Church actually used them in some exorcism cases and stuff, which I found interesting because they sort of considered themselves Christian mediums. So I wondered how, like, is it not really dogma for in the Catholic Church? Like, can they reach out to these type of people?
No, you're not supposed to. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. That's just no.
The answer is no. There's no wiggle room. Is
Okay.
what he's saying.
So, I mean, maybe they don't call themselves mediums, but if you look into the way they interact, they are absolutely interacting with spirits. And in the movies, they're doing things to help the church, and apparently that was a reality. So I digress on that part. But the movie is that the doll is possessed, or it's not really possessed. It's not the doll that's possessed. It's that a demon attaches itself to the doll because the doll was a favorite doll of a little girl who passed away, and their family had done some kind of seance type thing to contact the girl, and somehow they it was almost in the movie, it was almost like they were making a deal with the devil type thing, to where they allowed this entity to come in on the basis that they're going to be able to interact with their child, their kid. Annabelle was her name. So they do get to see Annabelle, that apparitions. They get to see what looks like Annabelle. What it actually is a demon. And that seems to be a popular belief in the Christian realm of what ghosts really are. I've heard this before. Other people who don't necessarily believe in ghosts, they believe it's always demons, and they're just playing tricks to open up that channel to get in and cause you harm or do whatever they're going to do.
Well, I
And-
mean, we do call Satan the great tempter, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, and for good reason. I mean, that's not just something that's been made up by somebody and they're like, oh, that sounds good, you know.
Right.
Cool title. Let's make it stick.
Yeah.
Fetch.
So, I mean, I do think Satan convinces us of, convinces us of things. And why wouldn't, I mean, I think about a grieving parent and someone who wants to see their child so badly. Why wouldn't Satan take that opportunity?
Yeah, that's very true.
I kind of wanted to jump back on that too, to your question, asking about why, even if it's giving closure, something that may seem good, why might still be some danger. I think there's a couple of reasons. One being kind of what Brooke was touching on a little bit. I think there's like the idea that and you were touching on too, like you can fall into demonic things because it's hard, sometimes difficult to tell the difference. And those things, and I think we mentioned even a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned the quote from like Chesterton that talks about people see power and want to get something done with like these dark powers of witches and things like that. And like you feel like God may leave something open and not give an answer like to Job or something like that, but we go and pull the answer out even when he's told us definitively that he's not. And the other part of that is kind of that, when you're talking about like apparitions in the church, like messages that people believe, or even visions that somebody may have, these are all treated with high skepticism at first for a lot of reasons. And the Bible itself warns us to like test the spirits and make sure that what you believe is a message from God is truly a message from God, because we're the most deceiver of ourselves than we are of anybody else. If you want to read something into scripture, it's easy to read onto Jesus like your own image of him. It's very easy to follow, to fool ourselves that you got this message, or that you saw something, that you heard something that, you think God told you. So anytime any of those happen, like we should take it and make sure that, our elders in the church aren't seeing like some kind of contradiction to already revealed gospel, or contradiction to something in the scriptures, because otherwise on our own, we want to believe ourselves. Like that's what we want to do. We want to see what we want to see.
I think a couple times in my life, somebody has come to me and said, I have a message from God for you. That should be like red flags, in my opinion, because what I've found is truly when God is speaking, God's not necessarily just speaking to one person. So if like you're getting a message that nobody else is getting, I think you'd have to question whether or not that's true. That God normally bubbles visions up amongst people, so that you do have this confirmation. So yeah, I mean, we want
think of how often too, like in scripture, it's like something you don't want to do, like especially when somebody brings it, like I have a message from God that tells me that I need to do this thing that I really want to do. When you see like Moses is like, no, I do not want to go talk to Pharaoh.
Yeah. So, and that's funny that you say that, because one of the things a lady came, you know how leadership roles change over in the church. And so she was rolling off and I was rolling on into her leadership role. And she came to my office one day and said, I just need to tell you that I got a message from God that you do not need to be in this role, And I was like, yeah, that's weird. I mean, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, like, and I think those can be true, but I think our
Sure.
initial standpoint should be of like skepticism, and then treat it with prayer, and like you said, see if, like you said, God sends a message to multiple people almost always. So like, there's no need for rash action, which is what you see, I think, when you're talking about people who want to open up mediums to the dead. They want to get that resolved now, and that's usually not how God works. And so I think it's a area of danger just inherently because of that.
I did have somebody come to me one time and told me that they had a message for me from aliens.
Now, how did that go? I would want to listen to that.
I mean, I listened to what the aliens were telling me, but I decided that,
Probably wasn't
wouldn't
aliens.
Probably wouldn't take the
that's
aliens
important.
advice.
That's pretty good stuff. Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's interesting to talk about. There's no definitive answers in this, and all we can do is speculate. I do wonder, I guess I just don't buy into that 100% of ghost sightings or any kind of supernatural is demonic. I have a hard time with that, just because I feel like sometimes, like what you experienced, Brooke, why would you be seeing why would that be a demonic spirit that you're seeing in a church that is, like, I just don't understand logically why that would be a demon. Right?
And I think, thinking about this logically, not all spirits could be demonic, but if we're talking about faith in a God that speaks to us. I mean, you can't say that can be true, but the flip side's not going to be true. I don't know.
I also think that if you believe in spirits, then it should require you to believe in angels and demons too. Like, how can you? Because I do know of people who believe in ghosts. They just don't buy into the other stuff. Like, how can you pick and choose that? Because it seems like if there's a spiritual realm, angels and demons is just as plausible as anything else.
Well, if you don't believe in afterlife or whatever, why would there be souls?
Exactly. You should believe in nothing if you don't believe in the afterlife. If you don't believe in God, then you should believe in nothing. But it doesn't seem like that's always the case. It seems like people are more apt to believe in ghosts and afterlife than they are God and demons and angels.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say over across the world, there's definitely across history. If you're in a non-Christian area, I could see where that might make sense or something. But yeah, if you're rejecting the possibility of God and supernatural entirely, but believing in ghosts, that's a hard one to reconcile for me.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. Well, this was a pretty good conversation. Spooky conversation for the Spooktacular Halloween something yada yada.
Something yada yada yada.
That's right. All right. Peace be to you, and have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.